that at the appropriate time, cases can be discussed. We don't talk about ongoing matters, but when matters are concluded, there may be ways to talk about certain situations and how they developed.
Madam Attorney General, some of the suggestions that Reverend Wendell Anthony made today relative to standards and grants and things, is that something that could maybe be more easily implemented than some other suggestions that might come your way as a result of these forums?
So what I thought Reverend Anthony's comments were really covered a number of excellent ideas about the need to have national consistency in a number of areas, but more importantly, accountability and transparency. This is a concern that we hear a lot about when we talk to community members, and how we make sure that happens across the country is something that we're looking at and we take very, very seriously. With respect to national standards, it sort of depends upon the issue. One of the things that we do at the department is work closely with law enforcement organizations in order to try and have consistency. One of the issues that also was raised this morning was the collection of data about law enforcement and civilian interactions. And while departments collect this data and report it to the FBI in a number of ways, they collect in different ways, they record in different ways, just because they have different systems. And so trying to find ways to have a working relationship with law enforcement, to work on some consistent standards there is something that we're very much involved in. We also have been trying to, and I think doing very well, working with police departments across the country on issues of concern, and where one police department has an issue of concern, making those interests and the results available nationwide. You know, police departments often come to us and they'll say, you know, my use of force policy hasn't been revised in a number of years. Can you give me some examples? Can you give me some assistance? And so we talk to departments that have done well in that area, and we will connect those departments. And out of that, you will see common issues being dealt with in a common way. You know, police departments are agents of municipalities, and so from a federal level, you know, we don't have the ability to pass a law and impose a particular set of standards on them, but we certainly can work with them, and we do work with local law enforcement all the time to share best practices, to share common issues. And what I would say is that the discussion going on within policing now is very much about how can they in fact make sure that everyone has access to those best practices. With respect to the grant money that we have a number of different grant programs, and we always view that as a way to help incentivize police officers and departments to in fact avail themselves of training, of new technology, of these best practices, and we're always willing to work with them to make sure that they are compliant, as every grant requires them to be, so with all the relevant Civil Rights Act laws as well. There was a hand over here. Yes,
Tatiana Wheeler from the Michigan Chronicle. How are you?
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, what resources are available for myself to educate myself about my rights when it comes to law enforcement? Because like you said, you know, the relationship between law enforcement and the community has, you know, a gap that we're trying to bridge. But, you know, if I am in a situation, you know, how do I get myself informed of what my rights are?
And I think one of the points that someone made this morning also was that the best time to build a relationship is before something occurs,
Absolutely.
Obviously. And so that's where we've seen success in communities, is when they have systems to help people learn about police interactions before something happens. And so when there is an incident, people have an understanding of why police do certain things in a certain way, and the police also will have an understanding of why the community may respond in a certain way. You know, it really depends upon, I don't know whether you're in school or not, but there are, but certainly I would say that particularly for every young person, you know, there are organizations that sponsor, you know your rights kind of classes.
Right. Okay.
But as I mentioned before, making sure that there's a bridge to talk to law enforcement, a way to talk to them and connect with them. Also, law schools can be very helpful in this regard as well, in setting up programs like that. So there are some options, and I think Detroit actually offers some good ones.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Stephanie Davis with WWJ, CBS Radio Local. Thank you so much. I have two questions, and I'll ask the first one. I know this is a series of community justice forums that you're holding. What happens afterwards with the information, and
Thank you very much for that question. So as a bit of a backdrop, this past year I've been on a community policing tour, as I indicated, looking at jurisdictions that have come back from a very challenged relationship and looking at the best practices and commonalities there, as well as cities that are focusing on the recommendations in the President's 21st Century Task Force. We're issuing a report on that tour this month. Now we're moving to the National Justice Forums, really spurred by the tragic events of the past month and the clear need to not just have a conversation, but give people some clear, concrete solutions, which again, I think will come from community groups and from those connections. We intend to gather this information, but we also intend to stay in these areas, work with these communities to the extent that we can provide guidance and support in implementing the specific actions, whether it's through a grant program or through working with the police department, through technical assistance and training. Depending upon what the issue is, we want to stay involved as well. But we also want to gather all of these suggestions and publish them as well, because we're not going to be able to get to every city in the U.S. And there really has been a request from so many people just for some ideas, some suggestions, some concrete ways of moving forward. So we will be publishing guidance arising out of these forums as well, so that other jurisdictions can see if it worked here, perhaps it may work in my community. We've had some success with that, mainly because